reasonable questions for anti SJWs. Let's go, man.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
Since I'm not an entertainer, I don't believe that I countered any SJW arguments with my own hypersensitivity. Now, there are other YouTubers to whom I'm subscribed. They act a certain way to be funny, so if you don't understand it, if you cannot look past the so-called hypersensitivity to understand their actual arguments, then what can I say? Get a better sense of humor?
How do you define right-wing? Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right-wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right-wing a bad thing to you? And if it's because right-wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
I'm not actually sure that I agree with people on the right. Now, let me just try to clarify something. At least from my understanding, it used to be that people on the left are the liberals, and these people are trying to change the society from what it once was, okay? And the people on the right are the conservatives. These are the people who try to keep the world the way it is, from how they lived, because they think that this is how everything should be. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Except for the libertarians, who somehow ended on the right, even though they're more like an ultra-left. Sort of like that. Nowadays, the left pretty much means some sort of anti-white male culture Marxism, and the right is pretty much anything that's not that, I guess. If you look at my video list, you'll see that I have criticized people on the extreme right also. So people like Black Pigeon Speaks and people who are white nationalists, I have criticized them. I'm not a left or a right. I used to be a liberal just because as somebody said so rightly during that time, the definition of liberal means freedom. So if you think you're a free-minded person, if you think that you should break the chains of tradition, then you are technically on the left. So that's how I subscribe myself. Now I don't want to be called a liberal left anymore just because they mean something else, like I've already said. So the most I describe myself would be a liberal independent, but only using those words in their literal meaning, by their literal meaning. And if that's too complicated for you, then a simpler term to describe myself would be an anti-cultist. Because I always think that there's always another side, and I believe everything should be talked about. So, you are more than welcome to join my group of anti-cultists, just so you know that your feelings will not be protected. So, if you say any nonsense that remotely annoys me, I will not hold back. I don't care which side you're on, and I don't care if initially you're like a huge fan of mine and and you want to tell me that how much you would support me. I don't care. I don't hold back, so prepare for the worst.
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter?
I don't know anything about this bleach thing, but who hasn't tried to have a conversation?
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
Well, first of all, I don't use Twitter that much, even though I do have a Twitter account. And I don't actually like it that much because you can only write so much. And I like to explain myself thoroughly so I won't be attacked so easily. Not that it's successful, but that's what I try to do. And if you're just using Twitter as your evidence that they're not logical thinkers, then maybe you should look elsewhere, like maybe the YouTube comment section, maybe? Because you should be able to find quite a lot of people who are quite reasonable about their position. So I think I can reconcile that fine. And another thing that you should keep awareness of is that you might have a little bit of a attention bias because, sure, there are people online, they're just completely irrational. They're like completely jokers, both on the left and the right, you know? So rather than just seeing those people, you know, I would recommend you go through the YouTube comment section a little bit more thorough and see for yourself.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
E.g.? I mean, dear Christy Winters, on that debate, remember that you had with Sargon, in which you tried to show examples of feminist accomplishments, but you ended up lying, basically, about a rape or sexual battery law in Oklahoma, in which you were trying to say that somebody ejaculating in a woman's mouth while she was unconscious is not considered a crime, and of course you got caught on that one. So if you lied about that one, how do I know that they're not just tipping the inequality more in favor of women, which is what feminism has always been doing? So, answer that question before you're asking us to think about the most robust feminist arguments, because frankly, I haven't seen any, okay? And you also made a video, is feminism still needed in the West, in which you had some really good answers, and all you've done in response to that is what you've been always doing. It's saying that we don't understand feminism, and you didn't explain shit.
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered? And if so, I would actually like you to let me know, because I'm not fucking around or presenting any gotchas here. I actually really think that we could get something done if we work together. So, yeah.
Well, it depends on how we're working together. If we are working together for the individual who are in need of help, and we don't let we don't let any ideology get in the way of the process, then I'll be happy to work with you. The only problem is that I tend to think that it inevitably will. Sort of like, working with a Christian church for helping the poor. I mean, eventually they're going to start praying, and they're going to start saying like they're doing this for Jesus, and they might help those people in the end, but it will be for the wrong reasons. So no, I would not do anything for the wrong reasons, because in the long run they're bad. And the second thing is that from what I've seen in the comment sections with you, Christiosity, hopefully I said your name correctly, I tend to think that you're somebody who would not actually want to work with an anti-feminist, because you still very much hold on to your feelings. I mean, we had a conversation, and it wasn't long until you started calling me or suggesting that I was a misogynist and that I feel bossy and entitled, even though I've said nothing of the sort. It was just all my arguments. So, this is the problem between the feminist and the anti-feminist, because we really don't give a shit about your feelings when we're talking about serious topics. But apparently you do, so we're never going to be able to work together very well, because you won't put aside your feelings and talk about things more seriously. So this is actually something that I would say, feminists, please, keep an open mind and think about it.
What is third wave feminism?
Oh my God, Steve Shives.
Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
Frankly, after taking the red pill from Karen Strawn et al., I would say that I think I have a problem with feminism in general. I mean, whether it's first wave, second wave, or third wave, the only difference is that those first and second wave, they did something which, okay, arguably a positive, even though this is still debated. Go talk to the men's rights activists, they'll give you another side of the story. Very interesting. So it's sort of like an ideology that's basically wrong, and but they ended up doing some good things, which is, by the way, the history of mankind. It happened with Christianity, it happened with Islam, it happened with communism, it happened with Nazism. Every single fucking ideology can do some good, and that's why people supported them. There's no ideology that just all did crappy things. I mean, why would you think people could support such an ideology if all it came about from that is negative, right? So, yes, Steve Shives, I have a problem with feminism in general, just because the ideology is basically wrong. And I've often asked the feminists this question, and I never got a solid answer, which is, if you define feminism as the belief that the men and women should be equal, then can I believe that but reject feminist ideology, including the patriarchy, including the women are oppressed, including those kind of things, that men are at fault somehow for all of this? If I reject all of this, can I still be a feminist? So far, nobody has been able to answer that question. Now, Steve tries to answer your question, what is third wave feminism? Well, you should damn know, because you are the archetype of third wave feminism and multiculturalist and I don't know what else, white guiltist. I mean, you block everybody who disagrees with you. Yes, that's the extreme form of third wave feminism. So really, you should just shut the fuck up.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different?
Simple. Please tell me the last time you heard of men's rights activists trying to stop a feminist conference from happening. Please let me know the last time a men's rights activist went onto the United Nations and tried to get all feminists kicked off of the internet. Please find me a prominent men's rights activist who blocks people, for example, and disrupts a feminist speaker, for example. I mean, I could go on and on. Now, let me just be clear. I'm sure there are really bad men's rights activists. And I tend to think that the men's rights activists, just as any group, should monitor and be vigilant of things that's been developing within their group to make sure that they're not turning into another cult, So, yes, I agree to the extent that they can be just as bad as feminists. The problem is just that they just aren't currently.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
It's not about answering for another feminist to whom you don't agree. It's about the ideology. So you call yourself a feminist. Do you subscribe to the ideology of patriarchy? Do you subscribe to the ideology that women are oppressed and underprivileged? These are the core foundation of feminist thoughts. I mean, just open any feminist books, just anyone, they will agree on this, So it's sort of like you can be a very liberal and moderate Christian, but yes, you would have to answer for the ideology. You would have to answer, for example, about the idea that somebody could pay for somebody else's sin that he or she hasn't even committed yet, or somebody else's ancestors' sins, and whether or not that's actually something that is moral. And that's the one of the core foundations of the religion, Christianity. And similarly, a liberal or moderate Muslim have to answer for example, the idea about killing apostates, So again, you might not personally agree with somebody who do these things, but this is under the umbrella of an ideology which you have to answer for if you subscribe to the ideology. If you don't subscribe to the ideology, then our question is, why do you call yourself a feminist?
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate? Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting? Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism, but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
Oh my god, I can't believe they gave Mr. Sir Blocker another run at a question. To answer your question, Mr. Steve Shives, no, I am not an admirer of second-wave feminists. And yes, I have read a second-wave feminist book. It's called The Natural Superiority of Women, and I still have that book. Okay, so, and I can tell you, Steve Shives, that pretty much nothing have changed. I mean, the only difference that I can recall is that people didn't pay much attention to that book, during the second wave feminism. And now they are paying attention to nobody's professing the same thing. Like, the natural superiority of women was written by an actual anthropologist, and now they're paying attention to Anita Sarkeesian. I mean, this is the problem. Anybody can basically profess their opinion and will get shitloads of money as long as they are saying the political correct thing. So yes, Mr. Steve Shives, as an ex-feminist, let me just tell you that feminism sucks. It always had suck, and it always will suck.
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right? That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
If you can actually point out what anti-feminist, including myself, who's an ex-feminist, what we don't understand about feminism without resorting to essentially arguing about semantics, then please do, because I haven't seen it.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now?
Because it's important, and because you can really fuck up somebody else's life if that person is innocent, aka a person with a penis. And we definitely do not just focus on sexual assaults. There's also the wage gap, there's also domestic violence, and these are all incredibly serious issues that affects everybody.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
Well, this is actually the most reasonable question that I've seen from the feminists on this video. I actually don't believe that you can separate what you call criticism against an ideology and the criticism towards a person or something. I mean, it's one of those conundrums like the Catholic Church doing this love the sinner, hate the sin kind of bullshit. I mean, it doesn't actually work as well as people think it does. If you really have such a negative feeling about an ideology that somebody subscribed to, then you're inevitably going to have some prejudice against that person. That's just human nature. So I do agree from that perspective when it comes to this anti-Islam movement. People want to say that they can do this, that they have such a strong negative feeling about Islam, but they're treating the Muslims as decent human beings, and let's just say that I'm skeptical that that can be done to a certain threshold. Let's just say like that. So to answer your question about the bigotry, again, it depends on what. Me personally, I have called out bigotry. I mean, I don't like to use that word because it's so vague, but I have debated against many people who make this mistake, and I have been attacked as a result. So not all, I guess. And the second part of your question that I would like to address is that it depends on what form of bigotry, because I happen to believe in complete free speech, which means that I don't, I only think that when it comes to speech, so when it comes to people writing stuff online, they could basically say whatever the fuck they want, and the only consequence that's going to be thrown at them will be speech. So if you want to use speech and arguments to stop their bigotry, I I guess I would encourage other people to do it. I certainly do it. But if you're trying to say that those people should be blocked somehow, should be thrown out of a forum, or there's some legal action should be taken against them, then no, I don't agree with that. I think that the people need to learn to deal with feelings.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
There is indeed systemic racism when it comes to black people, and it's not in the direction that you think. It's actually a positive discrimination, and there are many studies that has been shown that. And there are laws that favor black people, such as affirmative action. So, yes, there is systemic racism for black people, really. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is, why demonize the Black Lives Matter? Because they are wrong. And not only are they wrong, they don't actually propose any tangible solutions to the problem. Actually, I have many times proposed tangible solutions, so have TJ, so have, a lot of other people, about how to actually solve this problem, but it's not exactly the solution that you would like to hear, because it does not involve race. So, sorry, but we just cannot come to an agreement on this, because our solution is race neutral, and your solution is, I actually don't know, but it involves something that's probably even worse than affirmative action. And by the way, I would like to counter your question with a question of mine, which is that are you aware of systemic racism against Asians? The affirmative action is essentially something that's discriminatory against Asian people, in general, and we are not the whites. I mean, imagine that.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black-on-black crime, when are you going to do a video about white-on-white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
Stop making people caring about other people's problems, then yes, we will only care about our own problems.
Did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
You just talked absolute nonsense. Now go the fuck away.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
The people who are racist are those people who use race as some sort of solution to any problem. We, on the other hand, are actually skeptical that every single problem that's been documented is due to race. Sometimes it has to do with, let's say, a citizenship status. So, for example, Asians tend to suffer certain discrimination not because they're Asian, but because they tend to be first-generation immigrants. Therefore, we don't have the connections in the society. Therefore, we don't understand certain laws. We have a language barrier, and all these things that other people can take advantage of. It's not because of our skin color, it's just because we can be taken advantage of relative to other, people. And there are other things such as positive discrimination, in which we brought up over and over again, which I guess SJWs just kind of blocked their ear, such as affirmative action, and this is tends to just not just college applications, but also such things as grants and scholarships, in which they would give money to a Hispanic or Black person, and they will reject such a scholarship to, let's say, an Asian with equal or better qualifications. That's blatant racism, and I think that there are people who have talked about it over and over and over again, but you just sort of ignored it. So
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
stating this cat is pretty would be considered a personal subjective opinion. I don't think the Black Lives Matter movement is about a personal subjective opinion that the Black Lives Matter. They're making a statement by saying that Black Lives Matter, the end. So you should definitely check your analogical thinking right there. And the second part would be I don't give a shit about racial sensitivity. Once again, I said this over and over and over and over again. When it comes to serious issue, stop being sensitive, basically. Stop being defensive and actually using reason and arguments, and logical thinking to tackle those issues. Not about sensitivities, because I don't give a shit, and I believe we should create a culture of criticisms in which individuals would have to deal with their feelings on the matter, because I truly believe that that's when society will move forward.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Like I said, I call myself an anti-cultist, but I guess I could call myself an egalitarian from the perspective is that I don't give a shit either way. Okay, name calling is just words. Really. It's the freaking internet. I mean, this is the form in which people who want to just basically say whatever they want, they go on the internet to say whatever the fuck they want. So deal with it. This is what I want to say. I mean, stop going on about your feelings and just ignore it, or I don't know, answer in the smart way if you want to engage, but mostly, learn to ignore it and learn to take it. And this goes for both men and women. So yes, this is equality.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument?
I absolutely agree. That's why I don't give a fuck. And I'm not asking anybody for Patreon money.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, and I guess that's just what you're into, just makes you a dick.
Or maybe you should learn how to use the block button.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
Define harassment.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That's simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview, to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem. You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique?
Well, you forgot falsifiability in there. Yeah, that's the difference between us and the SJWs.
It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
Kindness is a double-edged sword. It should only be given to those who deserve it.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
If you're actually sincere about your question towards us, Christy, you would actually explain what we don't understand about feminism and address our comments.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom?
That, my dear sir, would be the definition of SJWs.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
Because a fucking fraud got invited to speak at the United Nations. Why haven't you feminists protest against that? But no, you actually supported it quite a lot.